has Julia as a mentor from her leadership that she provided at Lesley University, where she really has led the way on arts therapy and using play therapy as a means to building resilience, especially in children. Um, she is she's a true globetrotter. So great to have speaking at the Global Resilience Institute. Julia has been in over 25 countries providing humanitarian aid through expressive art and play therapies, mental health counseling in dramatic and traumatic environments, often where resources were very much at a minimum state, and in the developing world, unsurprisingly. And she has helped in a transformative way, I think, um, uh, particularly again, young people deal with the trauma that they face around when we hope when we're back up and live, which will be in the fall, you'll come by. We have artwork across the Institute's walls that come from Julia and some of the folks that she has dealt with that really speak to the power of art and the power as a healer and in building resilience. Julia is a professor emerita from Lesley University. She's has earned her clinical master's degree from the IMC in UCLA in Los Angeles. She has her bachelor's degree from McGill University, and she is just a gem. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Julia, to speak to us about our topic today, which is achieving preparedness and resilience in uncertain time, the critical role of creative expression.
Uh, well, thank you for those of you who've made the time just to be a part of this. I really appreciate the time and the effort that you have in the interest of dealing with uncertain times. So I wonder if I could, I'm not, with technology is absolutely the worst thing for me possible.
Yeah,
So I think I will, I'm
Megan,
so
I
grateful.
think can help with loading your slides if you'd like to do that, and you can
Yeah.
just, there we
But
go.
maybe we won't load them quite yet, and maybe I could just let you know when we're going to load them. Would that be okay?
Perfect.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe we just take them off for now, and I could just blab on and on just a little bit more. Um, I'd sort of like to start with sort of confessions of sorts. And I like to just put it in the context of a bit who I am and what I'm up to and that sort of thing. Um, what I'm sharing is my experience. Different cultures, different personalities, different people always have different views on how things work or what's important and that sort of thing. So I very humbly say, this is my experience. And with all the graciousness, I'm certainly not an expert because I really believe in each individual person is an expert in and of themselves. And I think they have the opportunity to know who they are, when they are, and what they do. The next part is I do happen to be very privileged in life, and especially to have 40 more years in dealing with the arts and mental health counseling and all that. And Stephen, your kind words about your beautiful wife, Joanne, is very, very important because she is a total inspiration for expressive therapies in the arts. So please give her my best as it goes. This is not a presentation. I'd like to think of it a little more as an illustration, as if I was in a coffee shop with you and I'm sharing some photographs. So it's not going to show references, it's not going to show dates, but certainly at the end, if you're interested in that, I'm very happy if you email me and follow up with that. So just to give a context to that, and it's totally different than the normal presentations of Global Resilience Institute because they give you lovely charts and they give you lovely statements and flip charts and everything else, and it's amazing. So it always amazes me how I'm part of this particular group because the structural engineers, the Homeland Security, there's Navy officers, there's strategic visionaries, professors, and everything else, and then there's me. So anyone who's joined this knows that I'm very much an anomaly, but I'm very grateful for Stephen for noticing that resilience is just not mortar and brick that we need to reinforce when there's floods and everything else, horrible things that happen, but the resilience of people themselves. So thank you for certainly honoring that piece of it. Part of this presentation is talking about what is critical. And critical, in my view, is not a negative. In fact, it's quite a positive, because critical implies you're on the verge of something. You're turning, hopefully, towards something that you can be prepared for. So resilience is not necessarily about bouncing back. It might be an adaptive sense of a new normal, but the ability to raise above that, feel more confident in yourself, and move forward. So I'm not necessarily talking a bit about it as a bounce back, because I'm not really sure we ever do bounce back to what was before. I think it's very much a new normal. So as Harvey Shapiro mentions to me, I should show you a map of all the places I've been to and could been to and would been to. But again, please forgive me, because the technical part of this is not where I'm at the moment. But in your minds, think about a map, because it really gives you an orientation and a context for where we all are and what we're doing. So today, it's arts in the service of humanity. It's nothing new, it's nothing old, but a reiteration of the process of art to make a difference in people's lives. And I've kind of put them together in terms of the 5 C's. The letter C should be A, but it's ABC. And I'll share some slides with you that really focus on what I want to try to bring out. So the first thing, the first C, is connectedness. And maybe we could have the first slide to really show a connectiveness of an extraordinary woman. And this woman is Emma Acheng, who lives in Uganda. She's there, and this is a contemporary picture of her, because she is spreading news about COVID preparedness. She's actually sharing wipes and ways to behave and what to do. But I know Emma from quite a few years ago now, where we created this book. I don't know if you can see me or the slide. Does that come through? Yeah, so this one is the book that says Cold Water, Women and Girls of Lira, Uganda. And this was a 5-year project. I worked with Jody McBrien at University of Florida. And we went down and worked with the children and the people who were child prostitutes, child soldiers, were HIV recipients, I guess, of Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army that swept through Lira, that literally devastated towns, devastated families. And this book really talks to both the trauma, but our book in particular talks about the resilience. It talks about moving forward. So horrible things happen, and I guess I don't need you to tell you all the horrible things. It's in the book, and you've often heard about it. But they were devastating to what it means to be human. When so many people died and so many people were hurt, how do you rebuild a community? And Emma was crucial for connecting us with the women on the ground who really made a difference. The proceeds of this book, if I could be so bold, go towards girls to go to school. They get $25 a semester, and it lets them go to school. So it would be incredible for everybody to keep supporting that initiative and many more initiatives that Emma does. So that sense of connectedness, the first thing that's so important is relationships, is the compassion relationships. Next slide. So this slide, I think it speaks to itself that it's a huge scream. And that scream is the result of feeling the pain and the torture of what other people experienced there in Uganda. The next one, next slide. And it also speaks to the winged bird, the broken wing, and also that a hand comes up to sort of reach in between. It's a very complex image, but it's one that I needed to draw myself, as well as the other, as a way of exploring and regaining my sense of purpose in what was happening and what was going on. Next slide. This is another incredible person who is beyond mention to me because she is extraordinary. This is Dr. Kitten Edelby and her friend who is head of the Almada Institute, Nadine, in Palestine. And as many of you know, there's been conflicts in Palestine and Israel for many, many, many years. And they have started this community-based arts program that connects many refugee camps and connects many children and people together, not only through visual art, but through music in and of itself. The sense of community that's developed through Kitam's work is off the charts. She, if you can imagine, she got a yellow bus, one of those huge Greyhound buses, and she turned it into an arts bus and went around all the different refugee camps and had a sense of normalizing for the people there to be able to express themselves. Next slide. So the second point, if the first C is connectedness, the second one is what is creativity in and of itself and what does it do? So in many cases, when people are hurt or there's loss or accidents or situations that come up that people don't know, it truly binds anxiety. It gives you the ability to express emotions, hold ambiguity and paradoxes in the most amazing way, because sometimes in life when it's uncertain, we don't know what's happening. We don't know what's coming in and out and whatever. And the arts, and I say in the arts with an S, but in this case, this was a young man who was 23 years old who had AIDS, and he died of AIDS. But the years building up to his sad death, he was able to express how he felt. And if you look in this image, he felt like he was under a magnifying glass, that he himself was disjointed and disconnected. And he colored in ever so carefully the black parts as well as the color parts. And you can see the body that's quite blackened out in the face, as well as other things that I'm sure you can notice. But the fact that he could express himself as everything he was going through spoke to the resilience of who he was. Even though he did die, he left a legacy of images for his family and friends to hold on to. Next slide. Some of you might know this incredible lady. Her name was Grandma Leighton. And Grandma Leighton was a woman who'd suffered from clinical depression most of her life. And she met a man called Bob Alt. And Bob Alt started doing contour drawing with her. You don't look at your paper, you literally look around the object that you are looking at, and then you create the images. And this is an image that she created, and they're all a little bit distorted, but they gave her power that she never had before. And it actually brought her out of her depression, which is very, very powerful in a profound way. That was in Kansas, and you can certainly get the reference from that later. Next slide. So this is another extraordinary person called Brian McCarthy. He was a photographer, and he wanted to go into war-torn areas. And in these war-torn areas, he would take a photograph of the children that made scenes that they would replay, or he would take photographs from the images that they created for what they were going through, and then create the photograph from that. So here it says, unfortunately, expert Julia, which again I would say that I don't believe that's true at all, because these children were the experts in knowing what they were emotionally going through and what they were feeling, and they recreated it through Brian McCarthy. And this went into Israel and Palestine and Jordan and Lebanon and many other places. So I do hope that you might be interested in his War Toys book that really explains the basis of what he was interested in as a sense of resilience, not therapy in and of itself. It was a way to make a documentation of these horrible wars that the children would experience. He has gone so far as to create little toys that are photographers. You know, when you have cowboys and Indians and that sort of thing that were in toy boxes forever, he literally adds a photographer to the scene to document what's happening as a way of neutralizing what's happening and going on, and really bearing witness to atrocities in a most unfortunate way. Next slide. So another concept of centering, and this is where you have coping skills and you have vision and purpose and meaning in life as you're going through things. This is of a little boy in the Syrian refugee camps. And Mira Saad, who is the director and the founder of Artichoke Studio, collaborates with many NGOs and many foundations to work with people to help with the Syrian refugees. And I was fortunate enough to go there twice to be able to work with the children and the families. Next slide. So they created these little tiny worry dolls, and we've kind of appropriated that from Colombia and other groups, but it actually works with the binding anxiety again, going round and round and round, adding characters to them, and then these people can talk to each other, or they could put it under their pillow for a sense of safety. One of the trips that I flew from these international trips was I ran into a monk who sat beside me. And I went, oh my goodness, how could this be? I'm literally sitting next to a monk. There must be meaning for this for me. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to ask him something because I wanted to make a decision in life, which way to go or whatever. And I got up the guts to ask him. And I said, what do you think I should do? And he was silent for 5 minutes. And I went, oh my goodness, he's silent. I never should have asked a monk. That was inappropriate of me. I should back off. I shouldn't say anything, blah, blah, blah. And then he said, and I thought about it and I thought, oh my goodness, be prepared is truly one of the most fundamental, brilliant things you could ever say to someone. Because being prepared means that you are full of life and about to engage and looking up your strengths and what they are. And you find your center of who you are and you remember what your coping skills are. And these children were able to say, this is me now. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to be. I'll accept where I am, but I can move on too. Next slide. So when I went twice to Lebanon, once in the Syrian camps and once in a part of Lebanon, the children, there was another group of children, and they were drawing images of their experiences of being in camps. This is one where a young boy drew his home. And I'm sure you can all take a breath and go, whew, that's an uncomfortable feeling of home where he was at that particular time. Next slide. But then this other child drew this fascinating little drawing about a whale. But the whale looks like he's about to eat those other little fish. Do you think he'll catch up with them or not? I'm not sure. But the image is that he's not eating those little fishes, but he's actually blowing out of the top of his, what you call that, the horn or whatever it is. But if you turned your head sideways, it sort of looks like a heart that's got something into it. So the metaphors that children and people speak through often have multiple meanings. They're not one way. They're not there. And I'm not sure I'd like to be a little fish in that picture, but I also know here's the anticipation of what's going to come. So what am I going to do about it? Next slide. But this child in the very same group had his identity in the patriotism of his country. And you can tell how he colored in those stripes that had meaning for him to show solidarity with his family and what that was all about. And many people in these times of uncertainty need to hold on to something. So they will hold on to their identity. So this is a concept of confidence building in themselves, not to polarize what's happening, but to regain a sense of purpose within a community, not just alone. But it's also about reality versus fantasy. And you can check it out and you can really have mindfulness or a state of fear. So how, again, to those children and into homes and people, truly find the confidence in themselves and what that's all about. Next slide. So this was another Syrian refugee, and if you look closely with that house, which means not quite as happy a house, mainly because at the bottom all those fingerprints are like fingerprints are left behind. His home was left behind. He didn't have that in the camp. It was a whole new experience. And trying to have those little flowers, almost as little people beside, were all the people that were kind of lined up and beside him. He tried to turn it into a positive situation, even though sharing how much role he had in where he was with his other people. Next slide. This is in Lebanon, in Beirut, and one of the cities. So many people died because of the explosion. The ammunition explosion was at the gate, and I'm not talking it quite right or whatever, but you can appreciate when there's a huge explosion and 3 to 5 miles turned into rubble and people were killed, what is left behind? This particular window had graffiti all around it. And graffiti, again, is another form of resistance, but resilience as well, to sort of make a message of we are still here. We want things to be different. How can they actually go on? But when you think about it, this particular image, which was taken 2 years ago, doesn't even exist anymore. The bomb took it away. The explosion took it away. So where are the families now? And where are we in relation on a global issue to helping the families that survived and to live on in such a disruption around there? So Mira Sad as well is working very hard in Artichoke Studios to reach the people who need to express what happened, who need to express the confusion and the disappointment, not to mention huge losses that actually happened there. So as I have a lump in my throat, I will continue on to a more local story. Next slide. This is a very brave man, and he lives in Newton in Massachusetts. His son, his name is Steve, another Steve, isn't that amazing? Bronfman, whose son died at 23 of brain cancer. Before his son was dying, he used to like Kermit, the Sesame character, the Kermit the Frog, and which was very active in his life. His father was a potter, and his son died of brain cancer. So my imagination turns these pots upside down and sees each pot as a way of trying to make sense and build resilience for his family and what happened, and to honor his son every time he makes a pot. But he also, with Pan Mass Challenge, gets Team Kermit on their bicycles, and they have raised, I think, $4 million since then or whatever. So it's not just war zone areas, it's when tragedy happens to family, where do we turn to? The next slide. So here we are in COVID. We've just spent this year just trying to make sense of who we are, what's happening, what's going on. And I created several community groups online for people that were either isolated or wanted to connect more, to help them through the stages of COVID and all what we didn't understand. So Sylvia Callan very graciously started collecting avocado pips for me. So when we talk about the arts, it doesn't mean it has to be some sort of super talented, wonderful artist or musician or whatever. Just collecting the avocado pits starts to go a long way. Next slide. So this was one group during COVID with their masks on and having the opportunity to share 6 feet apart, started turning the avocado pips into little birds. And they made them from branches. They made it from almonds at the top, loose pieces of wire. They created something from nothing. No fancy supplies. Next one. And some of them covered them over with plaster of Paris. And if you know, plaster of Paris is like when you break an arm, you used to put on a cast. Nowadays they have fancy plastic things, I think, but they still in some cases have the plaster of Paris that goes over top. Extra kind of layer of protection during what was happening. Next slide. And here are some finished birds. And what's inside of them are, again, the avocado pits or walnuts that can be used in different ways. And now they can start talking and communicating. And so in my 5th approach, this is what cultivating community is all about. It's a new normal. It's where positive emotions reign, where you're there for other people with sadness and a loss, but you turn it around as honoring people and objects and things that were and how they are now and what they might be. During those community groups, one in particular, a very dear woman died of ovarian cancer. She didn't die of COVID, but she died of ovarian cancer and was not able to let family into the hospital or for others to get together for the funeral. But she chose to die at home, and her way through was through poetry and literature and things that made sense kind of in her sharing. Also next door, even, is an incredible woman, Maria Meister, who's a lawyer, who at 49 years old was hit by a electric pole that just went right onto her in New York. And it made her paralyzed, brain damage, and couldn't use her left arm. To this day, which is 4 years later, and during COVID, the creativity of the family is extraordinary. The father, former engineer, filmmaker, keeps making equipment that would fit to help her work and to help her see in a very positive way. So the art of what we do is fundamental. It's the meaning making of what we do that is the most resilient core, in my opinion. If we forget the art of who we are or the art of what is, then we've forgotten our basic humanity. But it's different from everybody, and it's just essential to who we are. Even if you're just an admirer, somebody who collects, who appreciates, or whatever, it gives us a sense that is a critical opportunity to honor, be prepared, and anticipate our strengths and abilities before disasters happen, or before accidents or horrible things happen. It gets us to the center of who we are. So I say make peace now, sort of to face a blank sheet of paper, make up a musical song, learn an instrument, or take an artsy, naughty photograph. Because it's art not for the sake of art, but the sake of a resilient life. So just when you think I've said everything with connectedness, being creative, centering, confidence, and cultivating a community, I'm going to show another few slides that maybe you all could relate to. And I don't know if you could put everybody gets unmuted. I don't know how you do the everybody unmuted, but everybody could be unmuted. And I want to hear the sound that you respond to the next slide with.
Aww.
Oh.
So I love hearing those ahs. And this is my dog when he was a little puppy. And it does give you a sense of our humanness, even the art of playing with animals. Who could you ever imagine? Next slide. This is him during COVID. So this dear, lovely little creature puts on all these layers, and you kind of go, oh my goodness, that's what he looks like after a year and how many months of surviving COVID. Next slide. So you might get a few more ahs for those who know me and know Carrie, because these little creatures can bring out the best of who we are in our sense of playfulness, our artistic inquiry into the world, and our sense of being compassionately for each other. So in troubled times, in uncertain times, and whatever life has for us in the future, remember who you are and your resilient self. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Julia. That was really tour de force here. So inspirational and so educational. When we think often about disasters, at least most of those who get involved with emergency management and so forth, it's water and shelter and food. And to what degree is there a recognition of this important contribution of the healing piece? I think there is growing recognition about mental health as a key component, and not just to those who are victims or who are survivors, rather, but those who are the providers of support often there. But As you've been in a lot of places, are you essentially knocking on a door where people are open, and or are you having to explain um, why this work is important, or some mix of the two?
I definitely a mix of the two. And again, it's as many former students I've mentioned, it's context, context, context. But even in Uganda, you can't just walk in the door and say, "Hi, I'm here, a white person, and I'm dropping in." Very intrusive, you know, how can you ever begin? So it begins a friendship of understanding and going back again over and over and over. And the first time you're a stranger, the second time you're more of a friend, and the third time you're more family, as Emma and her family have said to me, which is very, very sweet. So it's knowing the challenges that are local, but also acknowledging in Lyra, they had music, they had dance, they had the arts. I'm not bringing anything new, but perhaps what you're suggesting is I'm reminding people that those are the strengths they have used in the past and they can use again. Because sometimes with profound loss and you're just despondent, you're hurting so bad you can't even imagine how you can get out of it. And reminding people of what gave them strength, what gave them hope, and what surrounds their meaning making, I think does help. But it's not immediate, everybody let me in a big, big context.
Right. I'd like to open it up to everybody here for some questions of the time that we have, or comments that you might have to for Julia to react to. Who would like to get us started?
This is the part where everybody freaks out because they don't want to be center, you know. So I'm just acknowledging.
Happily, you're diving in.
Yeah.
I am diving in.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, great talk. It's very powerful and moving to see those expressions. Julia, I spent a couple summers in Africa doing humanitarian relief work back in the day, and I was in very poor locations in Sudan and then Mali. And you know, art supplies or being able to have materials to express yourself there were, you know, rare. And so what I noticed, these were health projects I was involved on setting up communications links for. Because talking is so important on the communication link side, we were allowing doctors to talk to the health ministry back in the capital at these remote locations. I noticed that there seemed to be a lot of storytelling going on as therapy, especially in the Sudan, which had come out of a brutal civil war before going back into it, sadly, around 2008. So I was wondering if you could speak a little on storytelling and how that gets encapsulated as a form of therapy when maybe art supplies aren't, you know, available or whatever.
Well, I thank you for mentioning that because just first to the art supplies, I usually use what is in the region. So I'll even say to people, hey, we're going to the art shop, you know, and the art shop means we're going to a rundown garbage center. And from that, we pick out things that we might be able to use. So, and nature, of course, provides us with stone, and in the part of Africa I was in, clay, because if you put enough water together, you can kind of mold things through the clay as well. So if you got branches and tricks and stones and whatever, and I have this little tiny kit, it's called aquarelles, and they're a paint, but they're in crayons. So I can put them in my pocket and travel across all sorts of borders and turn stones and branches and everything into literally painting the surfaces. So when there is nothing, we use kind of what's there. That being said, well, one of the groups I worked in the schools with Emma Emma translating because Leblanco is their natural language and English they all have to learn at school, but obviously they weren't so comfortable in that, so I had to make it. And I encouraged them to make up a beginning, middle, end, and an obstacle. And with a beginning, middle, and end type story, they were to illustrate it, act it, and make a musical thing of it, just sort of tell the story. And it's fascinating because they would talk about bad creatures and bad things that happened and then good people that come in. But it didn't mean we could dive into, oh, you've been traumatized, what happened to you, do tell the story. So it took a step back to be able to use those metaphors to then tell their own story and version. And then what we can notice is that the degree to reality and fantasy. So if they thought they were responsible for all the killings, then you knew you had to get in a little closer to disentangle the childhood feeling like it was their fault that so many people were killed, in what way, et cetera, et cetera. So we could tell from the stories which were the ones that were higher at risk and which ones were healing components that they could do the narratives over and over and over again. What I like about the integration of some object is that it's tangible. It's concrete. Here I have the little stone, you know, sort of here I have even a thing of tape, but it's tangible. It's not stuck in my head. It's not stuck in an imagination, which is a good thing for imagination, but imagination can be horrible too, you know, sort of thinking what things could or couldn't happen in the future as well. But when I have this, I still have this tape to remind me whatever my story's about. So I'm very grateful that you bring up narrative and the storytelling, because when it's integrated, especially in foreign culture, foreign to me, cultures, not foreign to them, it's a way of exploring with a sense of safety and control and choice. And I think that's the most powerful thing. You have to have choice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia and Mark. Others who would like to, Patricia.
Hi, thank you. I agree, Julia, and really enjoyed all the visuals that you showed, but Mark helped me to think about another question related to cultural linguistics.
Yeah.
And when I was working in Guatemala and India, I often found that there could be, whether you have a translator that's speaking in their language or if they have some English that I was able to understand them, there still was some confusion beyond just the words. And so how have you found to kind of deal with that cognitive understanding of, you know, just the cultural differences and what the meanings would be?
Well, first I want to honor the images that are behind you, because those are just, they tell stories, which is just absolutely fantastic. And I don't know where you are or what you do or whatever, but clearly the arts have been a part of your life, which is very, very rich.
Thank you.
I like to put always buddies together. And it means that we would have a group of 20 even, or 25 people, I mean, just giving an example. And right from the beginning, I encourage that everybody has a buddy. That means if they don't understand something, they can talk amongst themselves or sort of do one for the other to sort of explain. Maybe the person doesn't feel comfortable talking, but the other person could talk. Also then put the 2 people into 4 people. So now it creates a sub-family system. So they're not telling me what the story is, they're telling amongst the 4. Then I get the 4 to join another 4, and now we have 8 people. So when it gets to 8 people, forget me, you know, who knows what they're saying or not, but they're engaging with each other and they're supporting each other. Back to Mark again, on one occasion was a little girl who's 12, 13 years old who had AIDS, and everybody wanted to stay away from her. She was orphaned, but you know, they didn't care because she was just different and she was having so many medical issues. But when she told her story about the broken winged bird, up came a whole other language of blah, 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 blah. I didn't know what that was, but I knew it was really important because the older 16-year-old girls literally came over and put their arm around her, like protecting the wing. So it's not for me. I mean, some of you know I have British in my background. I was born there. And all the times I'm going, no, 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 I'm not really British. I'm fighting really hard to get rid of the accent because the colonization of what the British did is horrible all around the world, you know. But here I'm in a bind because that's the system that they're getting educated in. So now I have a new problem. I'd like to say, oh, don't memorize that. Don't do it that way. I got a better idea. No, I don't. It's not for me. You know, remember the Star Trek we used to have? You know, it's like do no harm, you know, sort of don't change the. Well, that's the hardest thing often because we're like desperate to add our own view or our own idea for what something should be, but it's not for us to add in or even teach a way of doing something because they have their own way of doing it. And we want to open that up for more and more possibilities, not do it this way and that way. I don't know if I've answered you, but I think it's a fundamental question that every day of my life, especially now, am I doing the right thing? Am I intervening in a way that can be helpful? Am I assuming too much as it goes? And I'm forever asking those questions because diversity is too important to who we are as humanity in and of itself. So thank you for bringing that up.
No, thank you. I agree. The importance of different perspectives is so critical. And I've definitely made errors in my travels and research in that. So.
Yeah. And then you have to use those ones as well, right? Yeah. The transparency saying, oh my God, you know, sort of, oh, I really messed up on that. Can I back a little bit? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else would like to? Harold, can I put you on the spot? Somebody who's been to emergencies all over the world and particularly in the developing world about the value of the kind of work that Julia has done and how that could serve the mission that you've been a part of the American Red Cross, International Red Cross community your whole professional life.
Go ahead, put me on the spot, Steve.
Yeah, that's a real put on the spot.
No, but you know, I will say, Julia, that I spent time in Uganda too. I was living in Kenya, but we did a quote child survival project in Uganda, mostly down in Masaka and Rakai provinces, back in the early 80s when this whole notion of HIV and AIDS was being discovered, and Museveni, who most of us now look at as this brutal kind of a dictator, was welcoming. He told the organization I was with at the time, Africare and USAID, if you've got some ways to help us to solve this problem, you're welcome. And so we were able to do some work, but I was being driven around by a woman who patches of hair thin. And later I learned that those were the early symptoms of Slim's disease, which later became identified as a particular kind of HIV. And sadly, she died. And it's a country that, for me, you know, so you got my attention right away, has so much heartbreak and so much difficulty. I mean, I've not ever been there when there wasn't a new kind of a challenge. So one of those tours, we went to this place called the Luero Triangle. And in that triangle, they had a pyramid of skulls of human beings that were victims of some of the civil wars that seem to always go on. Last time I was there, the Museveni was basically working with a Western church group that was encouraging the arrest of homosexuals, people who were gay. So I mean, it's a reminder of the need for people to go in and kind of listen, learn, and figure out if there's anything we can do. I don't know that I've got a question for you, Julia, but you definitely tapped into a very strong place. And what made you decide to go to Uganda? I guess that would be my question, because it is a special place on the planet.
So, from a very young age, I always wanted to find a way to go to Africa. I didn't know how, I didn't know when. It was part of a lure, if you will, to sort of understand something that was different, something I didn't know potentially a lot about. Jody McBrien was a journalist, and she interviewed me once at the university and was fascinated in the type of work that I was doing. She went off and got her PhD, changed her career, and moved it into working with different education internationally with different cultures. She managed to get a grant from the University of Florida, and she went down there and she said, "Oh my goodness, it's not enough that I'm here." She said, "I really need an educator and a clinician and an artist to sort of all together to come down and help." And she said, "I remember you. Would you be able to come?" So this was just like, whoa, sometimes there are things that happen that sort of drop in the right place at the right time, and you're just ever so grateful that it happens. And I was a little bit scared because it was going through, from Kampala to get to Lira took 6 hours on dirt roads, and yeah, it wasn't the safest part of town, but I went for the first time, and I fell with Emma, and I fell in love with what they had to go through. And if I could offer any kind of bit more of a solace or a sense of integration, it was so compelling. I had to come back, And when I came back here, Jody said, "Well, what could we do?" And I wanted very much for the local women to be the instigators of what's happening, that we honor, because I'm still white. I can try as much as I can to change my color. It's not going to work, So it's doing the book was phenomenal in terms of getting to know stories on stories on stories. Mark, oh my God, so many stories, that sort of happened. And Emma just emailed me now with more pictures. It's sort of the friendship goes on, and the profound caring goes on. And it's because we took the courage to share in ways that are unusual. They're not the standard brick and mortar way. They're honest caring. I guess that's and they changed me. Yeah.
Well, I think you have changed all of us with the connections that we've had here, Julia. What a wonderful presentation today. And the work you do is just truly inspirational. And I'm so very grateful for having the opportunity to know you all these years, and for you to share as we come to, we hope, the lull, at least in the COVID work. As we know, though, we live in a turbulent world where shocks and disruptions will continue to happen. And we very much have embraced the whole idea that resilience is not about bouncing back. It's about, I suppose bouncing forward, but it's moving forward, it's adapting, it's evolving.
Yes.
That's what makes us all, that's how we develop character, that's how we develop our sense of self. And so finding what enables those to move beyond the predicaments that we face is I think the heart increasingly of what we try to look to do at the Global Resilience Institute. And I so appreciate your words here today to help remind us about, again, and reinforce for us that at the end of the day, it really is about that building block of people as us as individuals that it's going to get us to that better place. So what a spectacular hour. So grateful again for your giving the time to it, sharing the images, sharing your passion with all of us here today.
And thank you with all my heart, because I'm so supportive of the Global Resilience Institute. I speak about you all the time. I just honor what and who you're all about. And your leadership has really, really transformed so much for so many people. And thank you to those of you who've joined in. I'm sorry we didn't have time to go round and round and round to say who's who, but please follow up with an email if you want or need anything else, references and goodness knows what. So thank you greatly with all my heart.
All right, thank you.